Good morning.
Hey,
Good morning. Good
good
morning.
morning to everybody. Welcome to the Zocalo. It's 10 a.m. Pacific. That means we're here to talk any and all things related to Babylon 5. I'm Shar. You're
And I'm
Norm.
Norm. Yes, I
We're
am.
your hosts. And boy, do we have a topic on our hands today.
We sure do.
We have so much to cover that we are already expecting this to be a two-parter. Heads up.
Yeah. When we were thinking about this show, I think that we scheduled the show not knowing the full extent of the book and how much it would personally impact us, not just from a fan perspective, but from emotional perspective as well.
Just as a fellow human being. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah, we got some heavy stuff. This is going to be filled with spoilers. So if you have not listened to the audiobook or if you've not read through the whole book, we're probably going to get to about a midpoint this week. If you don't want spoilers, don't listen to this, tune out,
Right.
and then come back to us when you've finished.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just going to be chock full of spoilers. We have a lot to discuss, and it's not going to exactly be a comedic episode. Because if you've read the book or listened to it, you know full well why.
Yeah, that's fair to say. So for those of we have a huge and a really wonderful growing community for the Zocalo cast. You know, we've said hello and we've had a lot of new interest that has come to the channel and has come to our Facebook group. So just to let all of you know who we are and what we're doing here at the Zocalo cast, we talk about all things Babylon 5. We talk about everything from the episodes to Joe, to obviously Joe's history with Babylon 5 and with writing.
Yep.
There's so much to be said, but
yes. And seeing as how Joe is the creator of Babylon 5, this is seriously important to our vidcast as well as Babylon 5 fans. And a lot of us are reading this book. We want to know this man. And I don't know about you, but I've always respected Joe. I mean, he definitely carries himself in a very respectful, kind, and gentle manner. But now that I understand why he is the way he is, my respect went from here to off the charts.
Yeah, it already started off at a very high bar. And
yeah, but it only grew so much. And we're going to discuss all those reasons today. But before we do that, I would love to say hi to those of you who are already joining us. Hi, Terry Jones. Hi, Slice of Sci-Fi. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. Norm, you're going to tackle the book from the audiobook standpoint because you listened to that all the way through. I'm going to tackle it from the hardback version because that's what I have read. I'm getting the audiobook this week and I'm super stoked for it. So we're going to tackle it from both sides.
Sorry, this is because this is live. I'm having some issues with my audio, my monitor, not you this time.
Okay, everything's cool.
Yeah,
we good.
So far.
We good.
But this is live.
Okay.
This is live without a net. We got to roll.
We do. The show must go on.
The show must go on. Yeah.
Also, I can't help but notice we're both wearing Zcast merch. Yo.
Yeah, that's right.
If you like what we do, you want to support the show, that's the best way to do it. It gives us a few dollars our way to help fund the costs for being able to do this. And you can get more than shirts. You can also get mugs. There's throw pillows. There's all sorts of things. Yo. Look at that. It looks really good in a mug.
I love it when you just you queued up my mug prop.
And then today. Boom, set up.
Yeah. So yes, we have a bunch of merchandise at our store on TeePublic. All of those links can be in the show notes. You can follow us in a variety of different ways. So usually we have a longer kind of catch-up banter that we do at the beginning of the show. But we have so much to talk about. So I think we should just toast our group here. And we should jump right into it. So Valtu. Everybody see this, right? Right. It looks so fantastic. It tastes even better when you're using it. Okay, so
have you got your morning coffee? Is that what's in there?
I do have my morning coffee, and my morning coffee is going to make this conversation probably a little bit more lubricated, I should say.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
So, so we're talking about, and I'm going to bring up some props here. We're talking about becoming Superman, Joe's journey from poverty to Hollywood. Now, when this first came out, there was a little bit of an issue with some fans saying that my copy's damaged, my copy's dirty.
this whole
This
thing.
this effect, Joe said on Twitter, was deliberate as an artistic direction
Yes.
because he wanted to make sure that you had the look and feel of a book that may have been hanging out at the back of a bookstore or on top of a shelf and had a little bit of a dust or debris on it that you would just kind of blow off or dust off and get back to reading.
Only you can't. So hence the people, what in the world happened? I
Yeah,
got to go
so
to Amazon for a refund.
some people were trying to clean it off with cleaners, damaging their cover. So please don't do that. Also, that is also duplicated on the audiobook version of Becoming Superman, as you can
Yeah.
see, like
Now,
right
I have
here.
to ask you, Norm, like you're a designer. I've
Mhm.
worked in design for several years. Do you think this was a good artistic choice because of what happened ultimately? Was it a good choice?
You know, it's I would say yes and no, because there was some confusion with some customers that don't take it the way that Joe intended,
Yeah.
and subsequently damaged their books by trying to clean it off. So there was, a fair amount of Twitter interaction back and forth between Joe and his public talking about why he made that decision. And you know what? It's so very Joe to make that type of decision because for some reason, he still is operating under the mentality that his work doesn't have that kind of top shelf importance as some other
Mm.
works do, you know?
Well, I would say much like a lot of his life is, it's gritty. And that's what the splatter, the little grunge, you know, print is doing.
Mhm.
It does have kind of that feel. Now, um I think maybe they should have made it look like, yes, this is supposed to be a little more a part of the actual book instead of making it look like, oh, this was a mistake. Maybe that should have had a little more intention, but maybe
Mhm.
that would have been too clean. I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I want to trust, those who were creating this, that they made the best decision they could, communicating the idea that it was supposed to convey. And I think maybe either way, kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah, it is what it is. And it's funny. It's just one of those kind of things where it's just part of Joe's sense of humor.
Yeah.
It's part of the way that I think Joe looks at himself, even at this stage of his career as a writer and as an Academy Award nominated screenwriter and a BAFTA award winning writer.
Even
You have,
so,
you have all of these. He has built up his reputation to the point where people should know that this is
and
kind of part.
nevertheless,
Yeah,
here we
but
are talking about it. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So as far as the physical characteristics of the books go, that's just kind of something that I think that the audience needs to know before they're like, oh well, I opened up my Amazon book and
Yeah,
yeah,
Amazon did not screw up. Don't freak out. This was
right,
intentional. I want to say hi to more people who have joined us. Hi, Terry
absolutely.
Lynn, Colorado. John Bauer Socks. Hello. Yes.
Now Terry Jones says, spoiler, Mr. Garibaldi. We will talk about this now. For
Yeah.
everybody who has joined us or will join us at this stage in the game, in my notes that I posted on Facebook and on Twitter, this is going to be a spoiler heavy review because
Right.
we're talking about the book in its totality over the course of 2, possibly 3. Doesn't I mean we want
Who knows? We'll see how
yeah,
fast we get through this, right? There's
yeah.
so much to discuss.
Shar and I want to do this review justice. We don't want to kind of just
Yeah.
just blow through this review and say like, yes, it's great, Joe's awesome, his history was terrible, pick it up, buy it, and then we'll get on to the next show. No, it's like this book is supremely important, I think, in the realm of what we know about who he is as a writer, how it affects his writing, how it affected his life, how it affects our lives, and subsequently the source from where all of his writing inspiration comes from, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And as fans of his and his work, you learn so much in this book
Yeah.
about what has brought all of this stuff to light. Yeah, supremely important. That's why we're going to give it as much as we possibly can. So let's start from the beginning, shall we?
Yeah, so I'd like to read a little bit of my blurb to set the tone
Do it.
of what this show is going to be about. So I wrote for the show notes.
We have a guest.
We have a few guests, don't we?
Yeah. Well, we lost one. But
Oh,
I
okay.
still have another. Both of the boys were in here at first, and now it's just Ro. But
Well,
anyway,
well,
sorry.
cats are supremely important to this story.
They absolutely are.
Which
So,
also, I'm going to digress for a second. Which also makes the whole line with Londo's like Earth creature, feathers go quack. Cats, yes, cats, nibbled to death by cats. So on July 23rd, 2019, Joseph Michael Straczynski, JMS, to his throngs of fans and followers, and HarperCollins Publishers released what is and quite possibly forever will be the defining moment of Joe's illustrious writing career. Strangely enough, it's not fiction, nor fantasy, nor a work for which he is most famous, science fiction. This is a true modern horror story, replete with real monsters of the utmost depravity and of life-altering events from which few or none have ever returned. It is a tale of pain, of forgiveness, and ultimately of redemption. This is no fictional tale. This is no fantasy. This is J. Michael Straczynski's autobiography. This is his tale, Becoming Superman, my journey from poverty to Hollywood.
yeah, and that is no joke. Chapter 1 really sets the stage where if you read that last sentence where you're talking about these wonderful beginnings, right? Where he was conceived in a whorehouse.
Mm-hmm.
You're either going to be completely on board with that, or you're going to be appalled because the tone of it's not going to get any better from there. I mean, but when you're set up with that to start with, you're in for a ride.
I was describing the book to a friend of mine the other day, and he says, "So, how does it start?" And I said, "Well, it starts with his family history." And he goes, "Norm, I don't have a lot of time. Kind of like sum it up for me in a nutshell here." I'm like, "Okay."
TLDR, please.
Yeah, exactly. So I said, "Okay, if you really want me to put the hooks in you, his father was a Nazi sympathizer, and his mother was a whore.
Yo,
So
nothing
does
but
that
the
hook?
finest from the gene pool right
Right.
there.
So does that hook you or not?" And he's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Really?"
Yeah. And that's just the start of it.
That's
But
just the start of it.
that's where it all begins, right? And one thing that I really appreciate about the book is for as much information as you get at the very beginning about Joe's family history, it only
Mhm.
keeps going as time goes on.
Mhm.
Meaning you don't get it all in one big chunk and like, okay, here's where I came from, and then we're going to talk about my life from here on out. No, it's just like little bits keep leaking out as he learns more things. And
And
he
I
learns
think
about what his father really did.
it's important to say that I believe Joe was writing this book or compiling the information for this book 4 years prior to when it was released, because he says that I don't know how long the statute of limitations exists for this. He calls it stuff. He calls it for all this stuff,
Stuff
right?
indeed. Right. Yeah. Also, I don't think it's any coincidence that this book is published long after both of his parents are gone.
And I think that he also wanted to make sure his information was not only accurate from a historical standpoint, because there's going to be a part of the book which deals with a specific historical event that is paramount to world history, but
Yes.
also not just to world history, but his family history, and how he felt like he didn't understand why his family was just shrouded in secrecy and shadows, and this entire premise of they can't connect with the world. And I think that that's how it affected Joe personally when he was growing up, and still probably to this day, is that he felt alien. And then that's why this whole Becoming Superman title came to be, because from beginning to end, he felt like, I'm an alien, I'm an outsider, I don't know where I fit in, I don't know where I belong, I don't belong with my family, I don't belong with society. So who do I belong to and why?
Right. Which, for any kid growing up in that kind of situation, it would be no wonder if the kid is damned from the start, right?
Mhm.
If Joe had grown up to become a hateful, misogynistic, abusive, alcoholic person, n- you would have taken one look at his family and said, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense."
Mhm.
So one thing that I really get out of Joe's earlier years is despite this horrible setup he's given with abusive parents, an alcoholic father. They're living in poverty and moving around constantly. And there's this whole air of just, what are we doing? What is the truth? There is no real truth. Nobody's speaking the truth, right?
Mhm.
Um, Joe makes a very conscious decision at a very young age. And I want to point this out specifically because he does this so young that, the whole Superman thing, he adopted that as his moral center. Most of us do this sort of thing subconsciously, right? We learn from our parents what is right, what is wrong. We adapt what we see and hear, and that becomes what we know. Well, for him, something told him that what he was surrounded by was wrong. And so he had to create that himself.
Mhm.
To do that deliberately at that young of an age is remarkable. And the fact that he was able to keep it up despite all the obstacles along the way is even more remarkable.
Yes,
He held on to
absolutely.
that so steadfast. And it was, really, it's the thing that saved him.
And that probably is a great juxtaposition to where kind of his family evolved from when these four Straczynski brothers in Russia or Poland,
Yeah.
they were, I'm not sure if all the four brothers were nefarious, but I guess would be the patriarch, the specific patriarch of this family, uh, um, Charles, not Charles, but
I know who you're talking about. I forget.
because
Help.
how do you pronounce that? Anyway, so
Yeah.
his grandfather, Casimir,
Casimir.
Casimir. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
Casimir
Couldn't think of it.
Straczynski, Casimir Straczynski, his grandfather married his brother's 18-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
his niece,
You.
right?
Yeah.
And she was also very mercenary in her intent to marry Casimir because Casimir promised a future of riches, of prosperity, of America. And the entire relationship was built on this web of lies and deceit and mutual survival because they wanted to exceed and excel and prosper for their own benefit, not necessarily for themselves and for a family. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Also, she had aspirations to become a famous actress. She thought, oh, once I get to America, I'm home free. I can show off how charming and adorable I am, and I'll be fine.
Right. So that entire part of the prehistory before Casimir II or Charles, his father, came into play because yes, the grandfather and Sophia, his grandmother, they had their share of problems, but they didn't. In many ways, they weren't really the truest evil of this family. They were the source
No,
of
no.
great. They were the source of great evil because, without going into too many details, because I do want people to read this, they created the source of all of Joe's issues, really, and that was his father, Casimir, or Charles, because Charles adopted the Americanized version of his name as he wanted to fit into American society. But I think the real start of all of this is when Sophia wanted to show off to her entire family in Poland how wealthy and prosperous and successful she was, not because she wanted to do it out of uh, admiration for her family and where she came from. It was to do it out of spite so she could show people how
Yeah.
successful she was,
Yeah. Which was a
and then
complete farce.
and then lord that over them. And that's where I really think that the heart of Charles's issues started, because she was caught behind enemy lines in what was then to be Nazi occupied Poland.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're setting up for a wild ride here. And I think this all just goes to say that, Joe's family and it's pretty messed up. you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't even start with Joe's dad. It goes back a little further. And these are not necessarily honest, hardworking people. They've got big dreams and have absolutely zero concept of how they really want to get there. They just think it'll come easy and expect it to be. And when it doesn't happen, they feel entitled to that and say, "Hey, what happened?" They play the victim very well.
And that's a great point, because there is this entire lineage of using victimization
Oh
as
yeah.
the reason for why they behaved, and I guess and stayed the way that they stayed over the course of decades, even
Oh
to the point
yeah.
up until their deaths. And I'm talking about obviously Charles and Sophia.
Yeah, I mean Charles definitely manifested that for sure, but I think really the whole family kind of felt that way. They felt victims of their circumstance rather than I can control this situation, find a way. No, 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 no. Things happen to me. I don't make them happen.
Now, I believe it was it 7 years that they were uh, involved with living in this situation where, or at least Sophia was, where she kind of like ran a boarding house. She became very familiar with the Polish Nazi sympathizer police at the time. And then obviously when the Nazis came and started occupying these areas, she became friendly with them. And this is where really kind of like the root and the seed of evil was really planted in Charles, is when the Nazis and the Nazi influenced Polish police, they started to adopt him as their own, because obviously Casimir was still in the United States, kind of floating around trying to,
Trying to make it big.
trying to make it big, and obviously, in that Straczynski sense of their heritage, trying to fool everyone into believing he was more successful than he was.
Oh
She was
yeah.
there. She was there with Charles, and Charles became influenced by fascism and the Nazi culture and upbringing, to the point where he even went on patrol with some of the soldiers and
Yep.
was uniformed by those soldiers.
Yes, they had a uniform made for him and that was his pride and joy.
His pride and joy, especially probably the one icon in the course of history that signifies the greatest of evils, and that is the swastika armband.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean,
Right. So, I mean, when you let's kind of like dial it back a bit, because that's pretty heavy stuff.
it is.
So, when we're watching Babylon 5 or Sense 8 or Changeling, or when we're reading his comic books like The Amazing Spider-Man or Thor, no one would ever realize that Joe has been touched by this kind of evil in literal and figurative ways, mostly
Yeah.
literal.
Yeah, for
Right?
real though. Because
Because
there's a
you
point in the book where his father wants Joe to put on that uniform to see how he would look in it. And Joe refuses.
exactly, and that's collaborators. Yes, John, thank you very much. That's a great word.
Yes, people who were complicit and also enabling.
Exactly, and enabling Charles. Because
Yes.
because Charles was American born, but brought back to
Uh-huh.
Poland.
Yeah.
And then influenced by all this. So in that influence, Charles began this whole dynamic of being abusive towards those who he felt were weak, were different, were
Less than.
alien, were less than, were women, were children, were animals. All of that, he wanted to exert power over everything that he felt was weaker or less than human. And that
Yeah.
was very much the Nazi intent.
Yeah, and that was pretty much anybody but him.
Exactly. And that kind of permeated and influenced the rest of his life. So moving away from that, and when he finally emigrated, or repatriated back to the United States, so that's where Charles he loved that whole kind of faux military attitude, and
Mhm.
he enlisted into the United States Air Force, I believe, and became a military police officer because he wanted to wear an armband again.
Armbands, you say?
Yeah,
I'm
or
thinking Night Watch.
that right. So
Yeah.
that token of kind of very loosely given authoritarianism, to a
Yeah.
position that really didn't have that much influence as much as he would believe it did.
No, but he really liked that kind of power.
Right. And in the midst of all of that moving and all of because obviously he was deployed in a bunch of different places, he
Yeah.
met then 15-year-old Uh,
Yeah, I believe so. She
yeah,
was young, very young.
yeah. So his, oh gosh, I'm terrible with remembering names. His mother,
Evelyn?
Evelyn, 15-year-old Evelyn, who was a 15-year-old prostitute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hence Joe being conceived in a whorehouse.
That is a point that is lorded over him many times because and I think that this is a way that Charles could disassociate himself with his responsibility, both emotionally and parentally, because he's like, I don't even know if I'm your father.
Right. And he would hold that over Joe's head quite a bit over
Yeah.
the
So
years.
so let's enter kind of like where Joe comes into the picture, in
Yeah.
Paterson, New Jersey, and his upbringing. So how did you expect that? I mean, like from what you read so far up until that point where Joe came in the picture, you would think that their own child, Charles and Evelyn's own child, would somehow give them a different perspective on life, a different direction.
For a lot of people who do become parents, like say if they're, they don't totally have their lives together, a lot of times a kid is the catalyst for them finally getting their crap together. But for people who I think are so messed up and possibly a little oblivious to just how bad they are, no. And some people just don't learn. And Charles strikes me as the type of person who was not willing to learn, was never going to own up to his mistakes because everything was everybody else's fault. And so, why would he change? He was only going to get worse in some sense. So that hence, I mean, Joe was born into this cycle of just poverty and abuse because his dad did not have. I don't know if it wasn't the smarts or the drive or just simply was not willing to do the honest hard work to make things happen for him. He didn't know how to create a life just through good old fashioned hard work and perseverance. He's like, no, I need it now. Why isn't it happening?
Mm-hmm. And obviously that comes from, I think, the kind of the guile and the attitude of how Casimir, his father, the grandfather, like either raised him or that was the example that he had, or it's possibly
Yeah,
because I think this is speculative. This has nothing to do with the book. This is my own speculation. The Nazis had so much power over their fiefdoms that they were controlling during the course of the war that if you wore a uniform, if you just wore the armband itself, you commanded through fear and you had instant recognition of authority.
sure.
It doesn't
Yeah, I
matter.
think
It doesn't matter if you were qualified to do anything.
right. You didn't need to
Mm-hmm.
because you had the credentials. That was
Right.
it. That's all you needed to have. Yeah, I think that tied with Casimir's kind of guideless ambition brings Charles to who he is,
Yeah.
at least
Uh,
at this point. Terry Jones brings up a great comment that I want to address. His
mhm.
actions with cruelty to animals in our day and age is a red flag to serious psychological disturbance. He'd have been arrested straight away. Yeah, it's really important to point out that at this time, we didn't have nearly the psychological knowledge or things like red flags point, if you see something, say something that didn't exist in this time. People, a lot of people didn't even trust the police, depending on where you lived, because the corrupts and the police or the police forces were corrupt. Um, and people just simply did not know. And it was really easy to hide evidence. Not everything was on cameras like it is today.
Mhm.
And, I think people got away with a lot more back in this time than they would today. Today, yeah, I mean, you kill a cat and immediately you're going to get looked into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when, kind of like fast forwarding a little bit because, there are a lot of instances where Joe was saying that in his earliest memories, he remembers his mother being depressed always. That had an issue with one of his younger sisters after he was born. And obviously that kind of transcended into Joe not understanding why he didn't live in a family that had any affection, why they kept pushing certain things on him, like alcohol, why
Yeah.
he was always seeing violence being perpetrated to members of his family, especially his mother, through Charles. And this
Yeah.
is all at a
Nightly
very, very,
beatings.
very, yeah, very early age. And I'm surprised that I know, Shar, that you have a extensive history in understanding psychology, but usually children that have suffered such abuse have created this mental block to try and not remember that anymore. Like children of abuse, children of that were sexually assaulted, children of rape.
Yeah, the
That's usually,
brain simply
you know,
doesn't know how to process it, so it represses that memory a lot of times. Or when you're born into a situation this bad, you don't know a whole lot different. This is what is normal to you.
so he just cataloged everything because this was his sense of normality.
Right. This is what was normal to him. It isn't until later when you see how other people live that you realize, oh, my house is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does recognize that a little bit later as he does make a couple of friends. But at this very young and tender age, he simply doesn't know.
And
I
that,
mean, for all he knows, everybody's house is like this.
and that kind of extends to not just what was happening in his home life, but some of the accounts of when he went to Catholic school and he had Sister Mary
Oh,
so
God.
and so.
Yeah.
That
Oh.
that to me is like, okay, so he has these just abusive authoritarian figures at home,
Yeah.
but then you would think that he would find some type of some salvation or some relief in a Catholic upbringing in a Catholic school. But then I love how he describes the nuns, like Sister Mary, evil, just add evil adjective. It made me crack up. But these nuns, they were just terrible. They were
They
terrible
were
to him.
cruel and they commanded through fear as well. I think if Joe had gone anywhere but Catholic school, if he'd gone to a public school, could you imagine how differently he might have seen the world at that age where maybe he had been treated with a little more dignity and respect, at least by his teachers?
The small moments of kindness, where his mother's friend, Sophia's friend, the artist,
Yes.
right? And this
That
is
was
kind of
kind
like,
of a lifeline.
yeah, he was like, he didn't know how to codify kindness. But when he marred his mother's friend's painting with a cat, and he didn't get upset or strike out at him or physically abuse him for doing so, even though his mother did, he was
Yeah.
like, he was like, oh, that's what kindness feels like. I don't know this. This is alien to me.
Right. This might have been the first instance where that actually happened, where he didn't get the crap beat out of him for something he did. And he didn't even know it was wrong. He thought he was putting a very cute touch on a very nice painting, you
Mhm.
know? And then he takes him out for ice cream after that,
Mhm.
realizing he's a kid. Joe's just a kid at this point. He doesn't know any different.
But I find it interesting that up until this point, this is what he was suffering. He also suffered what what can be understood as his mother's attempt to murder him.
Yeah, at 5 years old, throwing him off the top of a building, essentially.
And him being able to remember so clearly that he essentially survived by being trapped in a network of wires that crisscrossed between basically these tenement slum houses, or else he would have plummeted
Yeah.
to his death.
Yeah. Yeah. And we
Right.
never would have known who this guy is. Yeah. I do find it interesting that instead of repressing the memory, he remembers it so vividly. Because I
Mhm.
feel like it goes either way, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like time slows down and you remember every single detail, or you're just like, I blacked out. I have no idea what happened because it's so overwhelming.
And that's what's probably the most amazing thing about reading about his history, is that he's so specific in the details, especially when it comes to that, or understanding how he felt when he was standing in the snow in front of the grade school that he was in, trying to sell a single chocolate bar,
Yeah.
and then that one stranger's act of kindness, trying to buy one chocolate bar from him, even though he didn't like almonds. Like those small details kind of
Yeah.
inform that he has this sensibility of not instant recall, but cataloging everything for the future, and that obviously
Yeah.
informs us a lot about who he is now as a writer.
Certainly. I think it's also a testament to his resilience. The
Mhm.
fact that he could stomach all of this crap happening to him and remember it with detail and be able to share it with us years later. Um, yeah, I mean, he was honest. He was built to take a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a darn good thing because he sure suffered through a lot. John Bowersox has a great comment that we
Hmm.
should address before we move on. He says his own arrogance and cruelty without accepting responsibility, this is Charles, and blind of obedience is totally the Nazi way. In the SS, you were trained not to show any remorse or pity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There are, because I studied some of this when I was back in high school. Well, in high school, I did a dissertation on World War II and Nazism.
Wow.
But kind of like the Nazis, or especially the SS, there are stories and tales of they were when they were youth, when they were the Nazi youth, the Hitler youth,
Uh-huh.
they were given puppies to raise.
Okay, I don't like where this is going already, and I don't know this story. Please continue.
But they were raised, and these puppies, these German shepherds, became their friends, their compatriots, their confidants, their companions, their attack animals eventually, and then the truest, I guess, the truest form of obedience to the SS. I can't say this for all Nazis because some of the foot soldiers, the brown shirts, didn't do this, but the SS were trained to follow orders, and they were
Yeah,
trained at times to, like, if you want to show your truest obedience, you have to kill this dog,
of course.
right? And it was kind of like that. I'm not sure if you ever saw The Kingsman. This
No.
it was a comic book movie adapted. It was Mark Millar wrote this, and it was adapted into a movie. And The Kingsman, they were a British Secret Service agency, and they gave you a puppy when you joined as a child, and then you were supposed to kill it as a form of loyalty or as act of defiance to show your morality. But with the S,
Wow.
but with the SS though, it wasn't an act of morality; it was an act of obedience. So the whole disassociation aspect of this with Charles, obviously later on in the book we understand, but the disassociation of morality versus the influence of power over those that are weaker and helpless really does inform you of why in Joe's later writing he always sides with that great quote, and it's my favorite quote from Interludes and Examinations, when the interrogator says, "Do you really think you can win?" And when John Sheridan says, "Every time I say no,"
No.
right?
Now we know where that comes from.
We know where a lot of this is coming from now.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yes,
let's
but
kind
that's
of
one
like
of them.
skip forward a little bit to Joe in grade school, and when he starts really adopting this the the attitude of what this title of his book is about, becoming Superman, because
Yeah.
comic books at that time in the 1950s, Kurt Swan, who's one of my all-time favorite artists, he created a version of Superman that was the ideal of truth, justice, and the American way.
Yep. Hence the tag.
Without that influence, or without Superman, where do you think Joe would have been to be able to mentally battle the evil that was influencing his life?
That's a damn good question. I mean, I really do believe that things happen to us for a reason. This clearly came to Joe's life as his survival mechanism. Without it, I mean, he might have found something else to guide him, to hold on to keep him going, or he would have succumbed and
Mhm.
become the very thing he hated. That's usually the way it kind of tends to go, is you either reject it wholesale or you become what you hate and you become just as much of a horrible thing that you despise, that hurts you
And
because
I
you keep
think
the cycle going.
now I wanted to ask you also, because we know that Casimir the First. See, the thing is that I also want to learn a little bit more about these four brothers, like the four Straczynski brothers, like how were they brought up? And there is later on, and we can touch on this later on, where um, a lot of the responsibility was, and that blame of accepting who you became was shifted on that. Well, this was just Russia. This is just what happened to Russians.
Sure,
We are
right. Yeah, this is just the
2,000
way it
years of
is.
war and oppression and disparity made people who they were. So you have these brothers, and then in a sense you have Casimir, the grandfather, who kind of transferred all of that to his son. And then his son not only inherited that, but he also inherited the influence of the Nazis And all of this should have been part and parcel to Joe accepting that as well. The this this mentality of who his father was.
Mhm.
But he didn't.
Right. That's what I was saying earlier, just about how he so clearly defined a sense of morality at such a young age that went against everything that his environment was teaching him. It truly is remarkable because a lot of kids, we just learn what we see and that's what we know.
Mhm.
And for him, something inside him said no, and he found another way, which I mean, I can't stress how incredible that is, just because so many of us wouldn't, one, not be able to survive these circumstances. We would have
Right.
gotten the crap beaten out of us one too many times. We might have been thrown off the top of a building, or we would have just become shitty people because
Yeah.
we wouldn't know any different because that's what we've been taught.
And that, I think, is at this time, when he was around, I would say 10, maybe 12, when he started understanding literature, investing himself into other worlds, understanding that there's an entire other realm of existence aside from all of this hatred and pain and abuse
Right.
that is worth living for, is worth striving for. And a lot of that is grounded on his love for these other fictional worlds, especially what he felt about Superman, Krypton, the works of Harlan Ellison, later on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu, all the literature that he was reading. There's something there that, if it weren't for that, you don't know what he would have become.
Yeah, I think he would have just had a very depraved existence, and you know, it wouldn't have been pretty. And maybe we would even know Joe for being infamous in some other way. Like, what if he became a serial killer? Would anybody have been surprised with this kind of a background? No,
Right.
not at all. Not at all. What breaks my heart is every time Joe's father ruins things, like takes away his comics, takes away his literature, where Joe has to go borrow things like Harlan Ellison's work because he doesn't have the means to get it otherwise. And just, man, yeah, just the very fact that he even had to do that, and be so secretive about it himself, where in a family of secrets, he also had to be secretive and follow suit because he knew. Well, I mean, his dad already was kind of trying to occasionally take away the one thing that was giving Joe joy.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't remember where I was going with this, but
No, I know that when we first started talking about doing this show, this was going to be a little bit more of a stream of consciousness format because there's so much to be talked about and the
oh
way it
god,
affects
yes.
us. But you're right. There is this point in time in Joe's life where he decided to go a different way or to pursue his own form of happiness, and he had to keep it secretly from his family because every single time he went home, he always returned to this environment of abuse, of oppression, of
Yeah.
cruelty. But when he was able to escape into these vast and different worlds of possibility, that's where I think he felt like, oh, you know what? This is something that is truly special. This is something that can't be taken away from me. It can't be taken away from the inside of me.
Yeah. It's his happy place.
Bones will knit and bruises will heal. The psyche will probably be forever damaged, but in order for me to battle this part of my psyche, I can go this different way. So one of the things that I'm not sure if I can't remember if it was mentioned in the book, but I do remember Joe saying that when I was growing up, and I wanted to touch on this point where his father, because he was this nefariously terrible businessman and always kind of like deluding people into investing in his shoddy business plans, he always had to move from place to place to place. Now,
Yeah.
we know
I
later
want to get into
on,
that too.
yeah, we know later on that there's a reason for that. But yeah, Joe's father, Casimir was or Charles. He was a failed businessman in many attempts to
Yeah.
try and create. I'm going to say create success for himself, not for his family. His family was
Yeah, it was all about
inconsequential to
him.
that. Yeah.
Certainly, he wanted all the credit. He wanted the fame or the fortune, whatever he could get, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you suppose? I mean, a theory I have about why Joe did kind of just attach to comics and these stories and science fiction so much is the fact that, yes, they did move around so much. He didn't ever have the chance to make friends, and that isolation kind of, I mean, it didn't let him have a whole lot of exposure to the outside world, which was somewhat intentional for many reasons.
Mhm.
But for Joe's life, it kind of inhibited him from developing deep friendships with other people. So his connection to a world outside was these stories.
And he said that, and I remember this was in an interview where he said, every time I moved, I could always go to a public library and pick up the reading from where I left off before the move.
All right.
Like the
There's
books.
always a library. And thank goodness, support your local library, people.
Yeah, he said, like, if I was in a, because they moved back and forth a lot from New Jersey to Los Angeles to New Jersey. Uh,
Yeah.
but when he read something in a public library in New Jersey, wherever he was at that time, moved all the way over to Los Angeles, where his father tried to restart his life again, or the life of the family. He said, I'll just go to the public library. Not only was kind of like his own quote unquote fortress of solitude, which is very obviously iconic to Superman, but he could always pick up that book and say, I'll just continue where I left off. Because Joe was poor in the strictest, most,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, awful conditions like no heat in the dead of winter in a New Jersey apartment that was just, a total piece of crap that probably should not have been occupied by anybody,
Yeah.
to not knowing if they were going to have food.
Ketchup packets in hot water were their family's version of tomato soup.
Yeah, that's pretty lean.
Just to put it into perspective, that type of poor.
Yeah, like we're talking malnutrition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The type
yeah,
of poor where he never saw a dentist until later on in his life. He never saw an optometrist till later on in his life.
Oh my gosh, the story about the glasses.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, Joe.
So, and then every single time that Joe was able to find a small modicum of happiness in adopting a local cat,
this breaks my heart so much.
His father murdered that cat because that cat brought Joe happiness.
Yes. And he always made the promise, oh, of course the cat can come with us. And then something would happen. And lo and behold, every time. And it wasn't until a little later that Joe figured out what was happening.
Right. And I think that
again,
that started
power.
Yeah. And also started setting the stage where no matter how good things may have developed in his life or seemed to appear, he knew that that small voice in the back of his head was saying, I can't believe that this is going to let me be happy.
Right. Yeah. Anytime he gets even some semblance of something good or happy, it's taken away from him. Mm-hmm. Whether it's maybe a slightly better apartment, or whether it's the cat, or if it's his comic books, it all gets taken away from him. He has that expectation.
Right.
It really does amaze me just how much hope he really does maintain through all of this. Hence the term, I guess, hope is all we have, that phrase.
And there was something that, just to digress a second, I was watching Changeling last night, and there was just this really beautiful scene that kind of made me cry a little bit, because when Angelina Jolie's character at the end says, there's something that I was given that I didn't have before. And she was talking to a police officer and who found another child, not her son, but another child that was with her son. And he said, what did that give you? And she just looks up and she goes, hope.
Hope.
And
that's all he had for real, Joe.
Yeah.
So can we jump to the comments for just
absolutely.
a moment?
Yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Terry Lynn, Colorado says, Joe seems to have hyperthymesia, I hope I'm saying that right, an autobiographical memory forming his ideal career. I don't know much about this type of memory. If you have any knowledge to impart, please tell us. That would be cool. And also says, it seems his escape into fantasy stories brought him to bring his life experiences into the in-depth stories that the fantasy stories we value from him today. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely a lot of the material we now know has fed from his experiences.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And back to Babylon 5. Thanks for joining us. Hope you can catch us on the replay.
Yeah, we'll be here hosted on YouTube, so you'll be able to see the rest of this conversation when you get a chance. But so we're at the stage where Joe has he's moving around. He's getting shuttled around back and forth. He went from New Jersey to Los Angeles, and then finally he was able to enroll in a college program. Let's go. And we were fast forwarding a lot, but the thing is that we want you to read the book. We're just kind of like going.
Yeah, we don't want to dissect every detail.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to get you before, because I only wanted to do this in a two-parter, is like where he went to San Diego State, and started to kind of like forge his writing career, looking for classes and opportunities where he could start becoming and really kind of like honing his craft as a writer, because he knew that there was a point in time where he knew, like, what, I have stories to tell. And this is when I say that, I mean, that's an actual theme. He's like, I have stories to tell. I need to know how to tell them. I need to know how to learn this craft. How do I do that with the very limited means that I have? The zero support. I was going to say little to no, but no support from his family.
None. In no way. Yeah.
And then always kind of like beholding to this invisible tether that he has that's holding him back and always making him return to his family dynamic. There's a lot of that at play here, but this is where things start to change for him.
I think the more you get kind of exposed to the outside world, the more you realize, oh, hey, there is a life out of this. And it takes him a little while to figure it out, but, and he has some stumbles along the way, but he eventually does get there. This brings a perfect segue to a comment John Bowersox just made. It's a mental abuser who wants to remove all the happiness of the world to beat you down so you can never escape. Yes, and Joe's father was definitely trying to do this, especially as Joe got older. He wanted to maintain that control over his child because reasons.
There's a huge correlation in a lot of his work, especially when I read Midnight Nation, which was a story that was inspired by what happened to him in San Diego when he was nearly beaten to death and sent to the hospital.
Yes.
But in Babylon 5, which is, kind of like why we're doing this podcast, but how this relates to Babylon 5 is that there are instances with every major character in Babylon 5 where they are driven to a point of no return and they have to make a choice. Everything from them has been taken away of importance. So what happens when hope, when promise, when the future, when happiness, when everything is removed from you? What do you have left to do? He said that when you're back up against the wall, what happens when you have nowhere else to go? Where do you go? You have to go forward, right?
You've got nothing to lose.
Delen's torture at the Inquisitor, her mental torture at the Inquisitor, stripped her away from everything that she understood about herself until she really understood who she was.
Right. At the core of your being, what's left.
In interludes, in intersections in real time, the exact same thing happened to John Sheridan. The exact same thing happened to Stephen Franklin. The exact same thing happened to Michael Garibaldi. They were driven to a point at their lowest and really understood where they had to go forward and were reborn in that moment.
Yep. Yeah. Now, would you say that Joe went through this? Oh, I would say maybe several times.
So many times. And I think that's a testament to who Joe is, because he's like, you know what? I am not satisfied with stagnation. Every single time that you become comfortable with who you are, that's when you have to challenge yourself the most.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I don't want to skip to the end of the book so much, but I do want to point out that the moment Joe does get comfortable with anything, he's got to completely change tactics and say, oh, new direction. And I think a lot of this stems from having such an unstable early life and never really feeling comfortable. But it's also that kind of thing where just you do have to keep pushing. Some people need their back up against the wall to make that happen. Other people just are kind of comfortable being in an uncomfortable zone. Like they have no comfort zone. And I think that's Joe.
I think so too. And I think that kind of influences a lot of how he moves forward, not just in his professional career, but in his personal relationships as well. And I think that because he knows and became friends with so many very influential writers, especially Harlan Ellison, because I think that Harlan Ellison, not knowing his full biography, but I think Harlan Ellison was a writer of that same ilk, where these were kids from the streets that should never have made it out, but found this found this way because they refused to give up. They refused to say no. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty remarkable. There is a part toward the end of the book where Joe breaks down the likelihood of somebody with an alcoholic father who will make it to be a famous screenwriter, somebody who comes from an abusive household, and goes down the list and kind of breaks it down to like, okay, 1 in a million.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you get when you combine all of those things and one person surviving all of that and still making it? It's like to the 49th power, if I recall it correctly.
Sure.
It truly is a miracle, but it's a testament to the idea that, you know what, there is hope. No matter how dire your situation, if you just keep going, if you keep working at it, you just might make it, because that is exactly what Joe did.
If there's anything that I took away from this book, and we are going to continue this conversation, Terry,
We must.
This may be a three-parter. It very well may be. I'm pretty sure it's going to be.
Terry says at this rate, it very well might. But you know what? That's fine. I'm perfectly okay taking however much time we need to give this book justice.
Yeah, because there's one of the reasons why Babylon 5, I think, is so supremely important to both you and I, Shar, is that it inspires us. And I think that as a writer, I think Joe gets the greatest satisfaction of hearing that what he went through that inspired him to write his stories, that in turn inspired other people to write their stories, is a great deal of validation as to why he questions suffering, the whatever happened to him in his past. Because when I was doing artwork, the reason why I became an artist, and one of the things, it's not my proudest moment, in my life, but it was probably the one moment I ever stood up to my own father. And my father was the greatest thing in the world to me. I mean, completely 180 degrees from Charles. My father was the greatest influence in my life. But he always challenged me. And the one time where I felt like, you know what, I needed to have my walkabout moment is when he says that, I don't really want you to go to art school. I want you to become a doctor. You're the only child, I think, in our family that has the capacity to do that. And I said, well, I don't. I want to be an artist. And he's like, and there was this schism that we had for a while, this fight. But the thing is that I wanted to follow my heart, the calling of my heart, as he says in Babylon 5.
Yes.
Because without Joe following the calling of his heart, where would he have been?
Probably homeless and drunk and passed out on the side of a street somewhere, honestly. And would anybody have been surprised? No. Or if he never would have escaped the cult. We haven't even talked about the cult. When you leave your home life to go join a cult because that's better, I mean, it really is remarkable that he has survived all of this, come out on the other side, and not just come out of it, but come out of it a decent and respectful and resilient human being. Again, my respect for Joe is off the charts.
One of the things that I wanted to end with, at least for my thoughts, is when people are reading this book, and especially if they're fans of his other work, Babylon 5 in particular, but when you're watching Changeling or even some of his other movies like Ninja Assassin, which I do like. Like, I'm not gonna say I don't like it, I do like it. But especially his writing, especially his run on The Amazing Spider-Man, Superman, Earth One, Thor, and a bunch of his other very, very highly acclaimed work.
World War Z.
I want you to take what you know of this book and extrapolate that and lay it down on your understanding of what you thought you knew of the work.
Contrast it.
Oh, hell
yeah. I don't know about you, Norm, but I have every intention of doing that with Babylon 5. I need to watch Changeling. I have not watched it before, but I cannot wait now, because now that I know more about this story, and I've heard about the real life events of this story, I had no idea that a movie was made of it. I mean, I got to be honest, I didn't really follow a whole lot of what Joe was doing in the 2000s. I was kind of off doing other things at that point.
Sure.
So I have some catching up to do. And one final thought that I have before we go, because our hour's almost up. You were talking about, the fight with you and your dad and you following the calling of your heart.
Mhm.
Next week, when we talk a little more about Joe's career, I've got a story to share.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, about just kind of how things happen in life, why they happen, and how things can go so differently if you just take a chance.
That's right. And Joe, if for anything, is a testament to just personal courage.
Oh
Just
my
personal
gosh,
courage,
by far
right?
and away. Yeah.
There's the funny thing is that one of the greatest quotes that I've always clinged on to, unfortunately, doesn't belong to Joe, but feels like it should belong to Joe.
Okay, what's that?
So Rocky Balboa is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. And
Okay.
in one movie, Rocky Balboa, which is basically the sixth of the 7 Rocky movies, he's talking to his son, and his son is blaming the world for everything. And he looks at his son and he says, "You know what? When you were this small, I used to be able to hold you in the palm of my hand. And I said to your mother, Adrian, who passed away from cancer, this kid's going to be somebody." And he said, "But you know what? You're not going to get there if you blame life. Because let me tell you something, and this is what applies to Joe specifically. Nothing is going to hit you harder than life. It will beat you down until you are on your knees and keep you there.
Yep.
But it's not about how hard you hit back. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, how hard you can take it, get up, and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done."
Love it.
And
I think that's a
that's
great thing to go out on.
that's Joe. Joe was beaten down by life and got back up and kept moving forward. That's how
Yep.
he won and is still winning.
Yeah. 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 He's better than ever, if you ask me. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, we'll have to pick this up next week.
On that note, let's take a look at a couple of the comments before we go. So
Sure.
let's see. Terry Lynn, Colorado. Yes, it will be a multi-part. I don't know how many parts it's going to be. It might be 3, but it'll definitely be more than 1.
Yep.
People with the syndrome, now, Charlie, you were talking about this. You asked, people with the syndrome spend much of their time thinking about their pasts, unusual form of memory to recall any specific personal events or trivial details from their past in an organized manner.
Okay, that's interesting. I wonder if that's just trying to process the intensity that these, the emotions coming from just constant trauma, essentially.
Let's see. She also asks, is Changeling worth buying then, Norm? Yes, 100%, absolutely, without certainty. If you hate it, I will buy it back from you. And
There's
give
a
it,
guarantee.
and give it to Shar.
Hey, winning.
Because later on in the book, if you haven't gotten to the book, Changeling is another gear shift in Joe's life.
Very much. Very much.
Also, one of those moments where you're like, I can't believe that this story was almost not told.
Right? Just,
because it is
oh my
so
God.
it is so bizarre. So I don't want to like stray too much off of the very dramatic point that we just made at the end.
Right, we can't.
Right. So
But
yeah,
thank you everybody so much for joining us. Thank you for all of your comments. Thank you, Terry, for your reply. Excuse me, got a little bit of an air bubble in me. Yeah, I don't want to burp on camera. That's gross.
I'm choked up.
Yeah, and thanks just for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, thanks for everybody for joining us, and you can follow us always on the links and comments below. If you liked us, please subscribe. If you love us, please share our videos with your friends out there.
Buy our merch.
And buy our merch.
And share the good word.
I'm wearing green.
You are. Yeah. Green leader.
That's right. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Tune in next time. We are here every Sunday as we possibly can be at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. What is Central Standard Time then? Would that be 11 or 12?
That would be noon.
That would be noon. Okay.
Yeah.
My math is terrible. Anywho, thanks everybody. And until next time, be seeing you.